one question that came out from the group as well, that maybe can get posed to the larger group or the larger companies that I'll just share with you, and we'll see whether we have time. But the group would have loved to have heard from the larger companies about the perspectives that they have about some of the more junior team members, say undergrads, joining some of the labs or working in the bench. How are they going to get trained, or what might that look like in the future to integrate them in the workforce? Because they don't have the experience like some of the other more seasoned folks might be. So there'd be some interest there if there's time. But anyways, I'll turn it back over to you, and
Excellent.
Thanks for allowing us to share that.
That's a great question, Mark. Hopefully we'll get to that later. Next up, Laura Redberg from Mass Bio.
Thanks, Jeff. Not surprisingly, we spent a lot of time on race. We probably spent the first 15 minutes talking a little bit about what our group saw as a disconnect between young folks and all the STEM opportunities in our ecosystem here in Massachusetts. And so we had a lot of university folks on our group, and they are having a hard time just getting students that are interested in STEM in the door and understanding that this is where you go, right? This is where you come if you want to be in this type of industry. And another, from a race perspective point that we make a lot in D&I at Mass Bio, oftentimes people are just looking in the same exact network, right? They have their 5 recruiters. Those are the recruiters they call. Those are the people they tap. And how can we make our whole ecosystem understand they need to broaden that list of people so that they have access to new faces and new names, and maybe bringing in more people of color and more people of all the different types of diversity that we try to create within Mass Bio and within our ecosystem in Cambridge. So we spent a lot of time on that. And we kept coming back to it, funnily enough. And then we did talk a little bit about how we miss our friends at work and how much more time we've had. And for some of us, I have small children, some of us, how we've moved our time, right? I can work right now because they're with a nanny, but then I work late into the night, or I get up early and answer emails at 7 a.m. But that we want to see people at work, a lot of what Mark just said, some hybrid, like this is great, but, so yeah, a lot of the same.
Understandably. All right, thanks, Laura. Next up, Sarah Regan over at Thermo Fisher. Sarah, what did you guys talk about?
Thanks, Jeff. So we spent a bit of time on what's the, continuing the discussion on what's the situation for co-ops and interns, and kind of how are companies engaging that. We had a number of people on our group from universities as well, a few from industry. So really just talking about the fact that, at least in the companies that were represented, that co-op programs are still a big focus for us, and ensuring that we're bringing in talent in those roles. Those team members often do play a key role on the team because they're there long enough to really make an impact. And so, you know, continuing with that area of focus for us and bringing in talent from diverse backgrounds. We also talked a bit about what working from home feels like, and that they're actually, while you're home, people are experiencing a lot more burnout than they might have in a regular day-to-day. A lot of us are on meetings from 9 to 5 or longer without a lot of breaks. So we're all looking for ways to use technology differently to help us break up our schedules and make meetings work a little bit differently. Because video is great, but you're not getting up, you're not moving around, you're not getting that ability to interact with different people. So I think people are really looking, I think the return to work and getting back into the office is great, but we all know that's going to take a long time. So, you know, some people, I'm going to figure out this trick. And one of the companies represented, they've actually shifted the official meeting, like 1 hour meeting that pops up in Outlook, to be 50 minutes and end 10 minutes before the end of the hour. So I'm going to figure out how that trick works and see if we can get that implemented to force people to shorten their meetings a little bit, to give us all a little bit of time back.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. Next up, we've got Carolyn Kelly over at Bristol Myers.
Hi, thank you. We spoke a lot. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. We spoke a lot about, you know, similar topics that the other, it sounds like the other breakout groups talked about. Maybe one nuance was, though, there seemed to be maybe some questions about the companies that were represented, as well as some in our breakout group talking about, you know, hiring continuing on track. but then representatives from universities and from a recruitment point of view, that not seeing that same trend. So maybe in some of the early stage venture capital backed, firms, that there's a bit of slowdown, and then also an increase in graduating seniors not having opportunities as they would have in previous years. So seemed to be a little bit of a disconnect there. And then I think, similarly, we covered the topic about some of the trends that we've kind of fast forwarded into in terms of being, flexible work policy to allow people with childcare and other personal demands to flex their hours. And also, obviously work from home policies that maybe were in place, but not widely embraced. And now we've sort of proven that productivity can remain. And then we ended our time talking a little bit about, I guess, somewhat related to some of the conversation about where we're not maybe hiring on the same pace that we would have, despite what some of the data is showing at the moment, and what might that do for longer term R&D efforts, some of those more clinical trial kind of work that might not be deemed essential to get medicines to patients today, but could impact the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Caroline. So next up, we've got, is it Cheryl Vaughn over at Harvard Medical School?
Yep. Hi. Our group primarily focused on question number 4 as well, business as usual. And I think there were a lot of different feelings about this. Some of the same things that people have said, and that initially it was really hard to get used to, and still is sometimes, that we just have meetings back to back to back and getting burnt out on Zoom. And some positives were that we are taking more time maybe to connect with people, friends we haven't seen in forever, and we can just connect on Zoom, friends and family Zoom. So there's been the positive side to thinking about virtual means of actually feeling connected. The other thing was one person said, I hope we don't go back to business as usual, because there's always problems with companies in Kendall Square not having enough space for all of their people. The transition for that company was pretty straightforward, except for people who had to be in laboratory spaces. That going from 20% to 100% remote work was fairly painless, and shows that we don't need to spend all that time in the same physical space. I think that's pretty much it. I think the one other thing that caught my attention was somebody's comment that we don't really know yet what the best practices in this brave new world will be, right? We're still exploring what will be our best practices for interviewing, recruiting, working, collaborating, and that will be an interesting space to study.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. So next up, Andre Williams from Mass Bioed.
Hi. So in our group, what we talked about was ways to connect with people. That was the common thing that kind of came up. So obviously in the time of COVID-19, there's a lot of, finding ways to connect with your group because everyone is remote. And so some of the people in the group shared out that they have team building exercises that they do with their team, where they create presentations and everyone gets to talk about something that's not related to work, to make sure that everyone in their company feels as though they know one another, especially as some people are being onboarded during the pandemic. So they've never met their team members before, and this is a great way to incorporate them into the group and feel like they have a voice and that they're heard and seen. And then the other thing was sort of, how are we going to, go back in the fall? I had a few university people in my group, and they were thinking that, there's going to be some sort of hybrid. There's going to be obviously much fewer people in a room in general, and just maintaining that social distance in cramped spaces is going to be a huge factor in how we go back to school and what things we can and cannot do.
Absolutely. All right. Next up, Lauren Solano.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Hey,
So
sure.
in my group, we talked a lot about two things in particular. One is a number of people were surprised by how productive and how engaged people have been while working remotely. Prior to COVID, a number of, let's say, leadership teams might have said people wouldn't have been so productive being fully remote, but it's shifting a bit. So I think that's promising in terms of the new normal. The second thing we talked about is making sure that people are taking time to be able to connect and engage with people while they're remote. So there's been a number of things that different groups have done. What came up with us is, you know, one team used to do a hike every year with the company, but of course we can't be in person now. So everyone did a virtual hike at the same time, same day. People took off a day, and it was just a nice way to be together, even though you couldn't actually be together. And then some other people have been doing like show and tells, where someone, you know, has a certain week and it's their turn to show and tell something that they do or like, or, you know, have exposure to or whatever. So it's a nice way to get to know people outside of the office. And so that should help also with bonding and, you know, coffee times, virtual happy hours. But I think it's important to make sure that we're continuing to do things like that, especially as we bring on new talent. So that way they feel connected to other people in the organization.
Absolutely. Great points, Lauren. All right, next up, Mary Beth from Paul.
Hi, everyone. I wish we had more time in the breakout session because we couldn't stop talking. So it was great to make some new friends. So thank you, breakout team. So for us, the common theme that came out of our group was bullet point number 4, and the lack of opportunity that our current student population have by not being in laboratories, and them not having the tactile skills, watching cells grow, purifying proteins. I mean, really basic science, you know, techniques. And, you know, is that going to, you know, is that going to hurt them in a couple years down the road, or is it also going to impact, you know, the great work that goes on? And, you know, something that we talked about is that, you know, could there be some opportunities in industry for us to work with academia to help these students in a real world, you know, whether it's by video or something along those lines, so that way they can, you know, maybe see some of the science in action to kind of, you know, help with the learning. But it really seems like it was a very common theme with our group. And the other theme was communication, and how important that, you know, that is throughout the pandemic for professors and students, and for those of us, you know, working at home, and how much more communication I think there was. So, but thank you for the opportunity for the breakout session. It was great.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you, Mary Beth. All right, next up, Sunny Schwartz over at Mass Bioed.
Yeah, so our group surprised me. I thought we talked a lot about the effects of work from home and what people liked and didn't like. And I thought everyone's going to love it and want to keep doing it forever. That was definitely not so with our breakout group. I think there was more feeling about challenges with working from home. The setup is difficult. Obviously now people have kids at home, which wouldn't continue hopefully forever. But also just conversations are more forced. So you have meetings about a particular topic, but you lose that just casual interaction with people. And then also that people feel like they're putting in more hours because you have all these hours of meetings in a day, and then you have work to get done after that. So there were some opportunities maybe for more remote education and more flexibility, but I would say by and large, our group was not excited about that. I think continuing, and a lot of concerns from colleges and universities about how to manage synchronous and asynchronous learning and how to keep just human connection with people.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Sunny. That's super important. So Tracy, you're up next. Tracy, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of educators and nonprofit folks in our group. On the positive side, I think people were pleasantly surprised with how smooth a transition it was to work from home, considering the abruptness of it. There's ability to be efficient with not a need to travel, that work can be done from anywhere, and then maybe on a go forward, some of that will stick. And also some of the creative solutions and communications and training that were necessary can also be brought forward to help us, even if we are back at a more normal environment. On the challenging side, several of the people that are educators are worried about their students actually having gotten the hands-on training they need, to Mary Beth's point about learning those basic skills, how to not contaminate cells or actually, make a solution. And that, some of the intern opportunities, have gone away and they're going to lose those training opportunities. And then, maybe layering in a little bit of the socioeconomic discussion, that some people are socioeconomically disadvantaged in such a way that they actually don't have the time and space to work from home. So even if they can have an intern opportunity, that isn't a possibility. And so if we are trying to weave in the discussion about diversity and inclusion for socioeconomically disadvantaged people, they might not have the luxury of putting their home situation and finances aside to be able to be successful. And that's something we're going to have to be mindful of, especially as this drags on.
Absolutely. Good, really good discussion points, Tracy. Thank you. John Tagliamonte, you're up.
Thanks, Jeff. We had a really great conversation among mainly academic folks and also one smaller biotech company person talking about, on the academic side, things like just the worry that graduating PhD students won't really find the market for jobs out there. And there maybe was a little bit of dip in postings, but we were heartened to see that there's an uptick again in April and May. And then the question about productivity from home was surprisingly robust, surprisingly positive, that it's maybe a little bit of the opposite problem, not that people aren't productive enough, but it's just so hard to delineate your work life from your home life, especially with kids at home, as many on the call know. So, so meetings get scheduled. I think I have one tonight at 7 p.m., for example, and I'm happy to do it, but where do you draw that line? And even in the, even protecting your weekends, that kind of thing, since your whole day is free. We also talked a little bit about creating those water cooler moments. So we've known each other a long time, Jeff. I'm very face-to-face extrovert type person that miss, those impromptu lunch meetings or, going by somebody's desk and say, hey, let's go grab a coffee. And there are things that are important to talk about that you don't want to put necessarily in an email. How do we preserve that culture is something we discussed in our group as well.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I'm with you right there. I attended a virtual networking event for the first time last week, and it was weird, but it was refreshing to get back and meet new faces. And
hard to hand your cards around though.
Yeah, it's all through LinkedIn these days. But
right.
So I think we're running lean on time. Carla, do we have time for one more?
I'm afraid we don't. It's already past 3 o'clock, but I do want to just thank everybody. This was such an excellent conversation. I can thank you again to the panelists for participating and sharing your expertise. I hope everybody learned something, and also from your roommates in the breakout rooms. I want to thank again our sponsors and remind you all to come back tomorrow, where we're going to be doing discussing educational innovation for biotech education in a remote environment. And then on Thursday, we'll be doing a deep dive into immigration issues for people who are here on visas. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Jeff, for moderating. And with that, we're going to close out the first day of the conference.